Hey there, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the This Week in Overwatch League podcast. And we're officially at the end of spring stage qualifiers for both teams. And man, did we end on a pretty crazy week in both regions, I'd say. Obviously, the East and their knockouts and some of the events that kind of unfolded there. And in the West, right now, it really just doesn't make any sense at all. It makes zero sense. The East is unpredictable. Like, there's just so much to talk about. This could be a longer episode, potentially. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. But yeah, we're going to get right into things. And I want to start with the West. I think that is the main talking point for me, because it feels like it is one giant mess from like spots, I don't know, 5 through 11, like that mid to lower tier. It just doesn't make any sense at all right now. It's not like other years where it feels predictable and things feel like linear on the ladder, so to speak. You just don't know what's coming next in a lot of these weeks. It almost feels like football in a way, where anyone can be any other person on any given Sunday, in this case, any given weekend. Like, it just depends on the day and who you're preparing for almost, which I think is really awesome. It kind of defines this season in a way that we haven't really seen that much from other ones necessarily. Like, you think one team is obviously better than the other, based on their history, their rosters, their placing in the standings, and then they get out there and they end up getting blown out by a team that you'd think that they're probably better than. I mean, like, talk about the Gladiators, for example, right? One week they're going out there and they're upsetting the Florida Mayhem, who nearly just upset the Houston Outlaws. And then they're getting 3-0'd by Justice the next week, who got 3-0'd by the NYXL, which kind of creates this, like, circle, you know, like this endless cycle where you just don't know. It's like, this team beat this team, but this team beat that one. Does that mean Team A is better than Team B? Like, that's where we're at. Does that mean NYXL are better than Gladiators and all these other teams because they beat Justice? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. All I do know is it really feels like rankings are not all that linear unless you're at the tippity top or at like the very bottom. And it was actually Amir, the assistant coach of the NYXL, who mentioned this point in a tweet. To give him credit where it's due, he says, "Say it with me. Power rankings are not linear," and that was pretty defining for me. That really stood out. Like, that's a quote to really think about. Like, just based off of these last few weeks and what we've seen, especially in the West. I mean, even to the East to a certain extent with Contenders teams, but the West specifically, that's kind of how it's been a lot. And I agree with him on that take. We're in this endless cycle. I mean, you see the thumbnail, I'm assuming. It's like one big circle, and it just depends on who you're ready for. It felt like the Justice were maybe preparing a bit more for Gladiators compared to NYXL. NYXL were maybe a bit more focused on Justice. You just don't know these kinds of things, and I think it's mad entertaining, so I'm not complaining. It's good when things are not totally predictable. That's what you want in a sports league, regardless if it's like esports, normal sports. That's the kind of stuff you want. So I'm glad to see this competitive nature unfolding, and a lot of those middling teams kind of struggling to gain an edge over each other. Aside from that, I think the East has also been crazy for a couple of reasons. Like, the West has this non-linear sense to it, but I think the East, along with that non-linear sense for like a bunch of the Contenders and like middling lower tier teams, is that there's this big fight going on for number 1, right? Spark, Charge, and Infernal are so crazy close together right now. It's actually insane. Like, I don't think I've seen a 3-team race like this in ages. Usually it's like 1 or 2 teams, especially in APAC. I mean, look back at Shanghai and the Dynasty last year, etc. We usually don't get this type of thing, and it feels like any one of these 3 can beat the other ones on any given week. It really depends. Every week it feels like there is a new number 1, which is sick. I didn't expect the Charge to be this competitive, so it's good to see them going out there, but then Infernal and Spark are always giving it their all, playing well every single week, having these crazy dog fights against each other. It gets you really hyped for what's going to happen in the second half of the season, because again, these guys will all play each other for a second time, and that could be a big decider in who ends up getting the number 1 seed in the East come playoff time. Something big to know. Like, when these guys go head to head, it is mad entertaining. And it's almost like the winner is decided by, like, I don't know, who woke up on the right side of the bed, right? It's so different from what we are used to. It is so unpredictable. And again, I'm all for it. This is the type of Overwatch League that gets you excited. Like, this is probably some of the most entertaining stuff I've seen since opening week last year when we were getting used to Overwatch 2. Like, This is the most invested I've been in quite some time, so I'm mad happy to talk about this, and I hope you guys are happy too. I think especially a lot of those mid to low tier teams fans are pretty pumped, and I can't blame you, well, at least most of them. Not all of them, we'll talk about that in a bit. But also, on the eastern side of things that I want to bring up that I kind of already preluded to, is Tier 2 and how they have shaken things up significantly since the start of the knockouts a couple of weeks ago. Like, for one, they all bring their own separate narratives to the table with varying results depending on the week. They have their own interesting playmakers to look out for. They're upsetting OWL teams, and they're just causing pure chaos on the timeline. I mean, having those extra teams to prepare for has definitely caused some trouble for most, if not all, of the teams in the East, like the standard teams of the 6. I mean, 3 Contenders teams beat OWL teams for crying out loud, right? O2 and Pokerface pushed Infernal. Or excuse me, O2 pushed Infernal and Pokerface pushed Charge to the limits. And then you have the Dynasty and the Dragons, who got eliminated by Contenders teams, the Dragons of which actually lost 2 straight games to Contenders teams. And I think this is probably why people are saying the West is better than the East, and I think that's very understandable, that they're losing to these Contenders teams. They don't really have it in them at times. But again, I think it's hella entertaining. I don't think that matters. At that point, we're just comparing for no reason. Just enjoy it for what it is. Don't think about who's better than who. Just enjoy it, you know? It's good content for all of us to bear witness to. And I mean, generally, Contenders teams, they themselves have been a bit all over the place with their performance, like even against each other, just to make things even more unpredictable. It feels like all of them are a coin flip, and most of them, like maybe aside from Rhodes, are had some sort of chance at least, even if it was just a small one. I mean, you talk about, like, I don't know, the ups and downs of Sin Priza, for example. Last week, they took a map off Dallas Fuel, and they also ended up taking down the Shanghai Dragons in a bit of an upset. And then the next week, they're totally down. They end up getting absolutely murdered by Panthera, who just got murdered the previous week, to upset the balance of things. Like, I'm really happy Panthera won. I predicted them to win. I love Fate, but I'm sure not everybody was expecting that because Sin Priza was being so competitive against OWL teams. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen. Sorry for my dog barking, by the way. That's all I can do about that. I mean, aside from Sin Priza, and I guess even Panthera and how they play like crap one week and then great the next, you could think about, I don't know, a team like Dreamers, right? They've had some crazy ups and downs. Last week, they got absolutely destroyed by Pokerface, and then they come out this week and 3-0 the Seoul Dynasty, which is crazy. And then they proceed to beat Pokerface, the team that just beat them 1 week prior. Like, huh? How does that make any sense? Like, what changed compared to last week? That is some crazy adjustments and just waking up on the right side of the bed, you know? They looked so awful in the first round, and now they look like a completely different team, and they're in the losers finals in their side of the bracket, which is epic. Seriously, it really makes no sense at all with these Contenders teams. It just adds a nice flare up to the region to make things more interesting, to get us away from the same 6 teams, to give you more narratives and teams and players to follow. I think it's great. Like, it arguably makes the region and the league a lot more entertaining since you don't know what you're going to get. The East is a massive battle for the top, like it's a 3-way race, of course, but these other Contenders teams are at least making things exciting, and they're keeping on the edge of your seats and keeping things from being too predictable. Generally, OWL has been really great this year so far in terms of competitive nature, and I'm not going to complain about that. I think that just having these Tier 2 teams put up a good fight against OWL teams gets people talking, gets people paying attention. And really, you can't really ask for more, you know? The league outside of the very top and the very bottom is super competitive. Preparation might be more important than it has ever been before. Like, it seems like the slightest underestimating will cost you dearly in any given matchup, unless, again, you're one of the best or one of the worst. Obviously, it doesn't help much with crowding a champion when we're discussing this, as again, it mostly just has to do with those middling teams who won't be anything great. But it still improves the health of the league, and when there's a general uptick in competitive matches and unpredictability, that's what you want for your league to kind of get you from getting bored until the big events, the big tournaments like Midseason Madness and playoffs. It's a way to hold you over aside from the big matches between 2 top teams. It helps you just barely hold on as you wait for the biggest moments of the year. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. I wanted to bring that up, this idea that a lot of the rankings are non-linear, and it seems like in both regions there's some serious competitiveness going on with the middle of the pack. It's wonderful. So we're going to move on from that now and talk a bit more in depth about some of the games and the storylines and stuff. And I think I'm going to start with the West. I think there are a lot of big moments that are worth discussing and kind of just picking my brain about to you guys to let you know where I'm at. And the one I wanted to start with actually was the first game of Saturday, Defiant versus London Spitfire. This was Defiant's chance to get another solid win on the board against a struggling Spitfire team who has looked incredibly lost this season so far. And they lost. I mean, it was a somewhat close game. It was back and forth, but they still lost. It is a real bad look for the Defiant to start off the way they have this season. Like, when you look at the standings, right? They're 8th place at 3-5, which is no bueno for a team that had pretty high expectations as one of the most sought-after cores of the offseason. And when you dive deeper in, like, their schedule and who they've played, it makes you feel even worse about the fact that they're so mediocre, if not below average. And it kind of got me wondering, and I'm sure a lot of you have been wondering the same thing, is the pressure getting to this Defiant team? Are they finally realizing that they have massive expectations on their shoulders after being hailed as one of the greatest Contenders teams ever for finding all that success back in the day? Has it finally caught up with them? Like, it just feels like something's missing when I watch them play. Something isn't right. The DPS situation still feels like an absolute tragedy that is a merry-go-round, so to speak. They're experimenting with all these different lineups. Nothing seems to be sticking. They're still lacking a solid Tracer player. Sombra metas are still kind of screwing them over to a certain extent. I like that they are experimenting with Sam. He's looked pretty good, especially on Hanzo and whatnot, but there's still a lot of problems, I feel, especially when Hydron's out of the game, and I just don't know what this team's going to do. Between, like, the mediocre play of OG and the mediocre DPS play, this team's screwed, and there's just really no chance for them. They can't really get with the times, they're not playing up to their potential, and that scares me in terms of, like, the World Cup even as well. Like, go beyond Owl. This is mostly Team USA. I mean, the only people missing are, what, Sugar Free and Super? This basically is Team USA, and they are being a major letdown. They need to play a lot better than this. Otherwise, people are going to be rioting in the streets for some of those substitutes to come in and play instead, like Aspire and RuPaul and whatnot, because right now what they're showing us is not good, and it makes me wonder if they even will be like a bronze medal level team. I don't know with how they're doing right now. I think there's real potential for them to get upset because they look lost. They look very, very lost. And they are lucky to be in the play-ins of this knockout, so to speak, this upcoming weekend, because their schedule, like I alluded to before, was pretty easy. We can take a look at that just to get an idea, right? Get it over to their schedule. And yeah, so most of their games, I feel like, haven't been that bad, really. I think aside from Mayhem, of course, and maybe Boston, they've been playing a lot better. A lot of these games are pretty winnable, right? I mean, Gladiators are a solid team, but could have beaten them. Shock, you barely lost to, and they've proven to be fraudulent so far this season. It took you 5 maps to beat New York, and this is a New York team that, keep in mind, is not as strong as they are in present day. You beat Valiant, which is cool, but they're the Valiant. You beat Vegas, but again, it's Vegas. Who cares? It's another weak team. That makes up 2 of your 3 wins right there. Vegas and Valiant, the bottom 2 teams in the West, plus a New York team that isn't as good as what we once saw. Everything else has been L's, like winnable games that they have dropped. The Shock game, Gladiators to a certain extent, and this London game. This London game was so sad. You shouldn't be losing to a team that is absolutely struggling to find an identity and all of these lineup and substitution issues. This is like the perfect team to be taking advantage of, and Defiant failed. They looked good on the first map, but it was mostly all London from here on out. Like, they're even beating them in the dive composition, which has been one of their weak points of the season. They couldn't figure out how to counter the Rhine comp. They weren't as good on Rhine themselves. They can't really seem to play Ramatra all that great. Defiant don't have that comp that's sticking with them, which is sad considering their synergy. Like, they should be able to find some sort of realm of comfort, but they just can't. They just cannot do it. And it's given London a source of life, I should say, It's too late for them to make knockouts, unfortunately, but this is a big win for London, and Defiant are now on the big downward trend. Like, they're not beating anyone. 2 of their 3 wins came against the worst teams in the league. Like, what else is there to say? They're just not a good team right now. Like, they might not even be mid. We all talk about this curse of them being a mid team, right? But they might be below mid right now. They might be below average, like near that bottom tier in the West, and just even in general. I don't know, man. I don't know. Defiant just have to play better or their season's done for, right? They're lucky to be in this knockout round. They're lucky to be 3-5. And if this is all they can muster with this kind of schedule, just imagine what's going to happen when we get to the second half of this season, when they start having more tough games, when they're playing more of those non-freebie matches. If the meta doesn't change drastically in their favor, or they don't start improving like crazy, then you could just kiss their season goodbye, right? You could absolutely kiss it goodbye. A team like London could quite easily surpass them amongst others. They're by no means safe, so they got to step it up big time. And I am terrified for them if this is all they can muster with this type of schedule. On the other side of things, though, London Spitfire. Big storyline for them. They adjusted. I mean, they took a map that they shouldn't against Houston, but more importantly, they get this big W against the Toronto Defiant, and they did it in a way that gives you a sense of relief and maybe some optimism if you're a London fan. They finally stuck to their Rhine comp and stopped playing so much Skyrippa and Lethal. Skyrippa still got some time, but there's an absence of Lethal. He's been a weak point of this team, and seeing him out of there just instantly improved them. They look so much better just continuously going with Sparker and Backbone through thick and thin. And I love that they were playing the Rhine, like they were just relying on Sparker making plays and playing around their comfort picks, and it worked. This is the London that we saw last year. Even if it's not the best composition to run, they still usually do it anyway. They find ways to win, they look good on control maps, and then they can kind of set the tone from there. This is what London need to do no matter what, I feel. It's obvious that playing these other things is not good for their identity. It just makes them weaker. I think you got to stick with what you know, really. Like, no one's expecting London to be that same team as last year at this point. That much is certain. But you could still be, like, in that realm of possibility of being in the knockouts come playoff time. You could still fight for a playoff spot if you just be who you are. There's time to turn things around if you can keep up this type of momentum. Beating Toronto is not all that impressive, but it's a start. And that's all that matters for London. I'm very, very happy to see them finally get back in the W column and look more like the team that I grew to love last year. That's about all I have to say on this matchup, though. One team is heavily going downward, and the other is most certainly going up. From there, I definitely want to talk about one of the best matches of the entire season so far. Like, might even be game of the year in my eyes. Probably is. Probably the best match of the season for me. I'm talking about Outlaws versus Florida Mayhem. This matchup was an absolute giga banger of a series. Just 2 heavyweights going back and forth for 5 rounds in a series that we were essentially promised. In my opinion, nothing beats this. There were some other great matches this season, but just watching the stars on both sides clash as 2 of the top teams in the West was a real treat. No team could really seem to gain the upper hand in the series until the very end, basically. Like, there were clutches coming out from both sides consistently throughout each map. Oasis is basically highlighted by Chorong getting a big boop onto Fearless. If you missed it, he was using Ramatra's ultimate, using his Nemesis form, he got nanoed by Shu, and he got booped right off the map to potentially clinch that map right there and then for the Defiant, and not let the Outlaws have the chance to turn things around. It was awesome, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the series in terms of some of the stuff we'd see from both sides as they'd step up. It seemed actually like Houston might end up going down 2-0 at the start of the series, because Mayhem, if you really haven't been paying close attention, have been historically good on Hollywood since the Pro-Am. Like, they have put on some masterclass performances on this map, and my expectation was that Outlaws were definitely at a disadvantage because of it. I thought Mayhem were probably going to stay in control and take a 2-0 series lead, but Outlaws were able to weather the storm, They didn't really let that get to them. They knew they were the better team deep down, and they were able to turn the tides largely thanks to Shu, Happy, and Pelican, shifting the balance of the series with some crazy clutch plays to get that map win. And from there, it just kept going back and forth, punch for punch, punch for punch. And then we got to New Queen Street as like one of the big peaks, right? This is probably one of the craziest games of push we've ever seen. Like, this just puts an exclamation mark on what this series was all about. It's very hard to surmount a 67-meter lead, right? That is what the Mayhem started the series off with, 67-0. It seemed like it was all them. They're going to close it out in a 3-1. It is super hard to win a map like that. It's really hard to beat push when you're playing another good team and you have a large deficit to overcome, because usually you're trading fights, right? That's how push goes a lot of the time. That's the standard. You go back and forth, and if you're down, that usually means you're gonna lose. But then Shu decides to freaking play Moira of all things, maybe taking a page out of the Dallas Fields book, because why not? And it actually worked. And from there, they proceeded to double Florida's progress after a really slow start. They were clutching out of their minds, got over 100 meters of progress. All of a sudden, they were the ones in control, and you're like, what the heck is going on? Your head is spinning at this point. At one point, it seems like the map's over. Then at another, it's over for the other team instead. I just don't really understand it. It was crazy. Like, there were some of the most ridiculous shenanigans throughout this entire map, including overtime when Mayhem were trying to push this back. It felt like the Outlaws won the map, like, I don't know, 5 different times just for checkmate and someone to never say die. It was crazy stuff, man. But ultimately, that went the way of Houston Outlaws, and we ended up going the distance on the Paul in a 3-rounder, mind you. And I gotta say, the highlight of this map definitely comes with Fearless. I can play the clip for you, if I can find it. On Sanctum, they did end up losing this round if you missed it, because Checkmate ended up clutching harder on the final fight. But it looked like Outlaws might turn this and take the first round because of Fearless's crazy Clutch Winston antics as usual. Just a typical masterclass performance from Fearless, the Fearless special, going crazy with the Primal, turning this thing around, and it doesn't even matter in the end. Like, that's what makes this series so entertaining. You think at this point, Outlaws definitely have it. They're getting all the kills. Mayhem have to scramble to the point, but then Checkmate ends up clutching even harder, checkmating someone. Like, they even lose someone at the start of this fight after buying all that space, but then Checkmate goes on a freaking tear, killing Pelican and Happy somehow with that. Chorong gets another boop kill, and then Mayhem clutch out this map win. It's crazy. But even then, Outlaws still were not deterred, and they would end up going on to win this series. In large part because Mayhem maybe took a bit of a risk, I'd say. Took a small risk, well, probably a large risk in some people's eyes, of going for the Pharah. Pharah's pretty typical on that one section of Nepal. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's Village or whatever. But they took a risk going for that, and it didn't work out in their favor. And then Pelican took it one step further on a decisive round 3, risking it all even more by showing us the Echo look when there really maybe weren't that many targets for him to go after with it, but he made it work. He really did, which is impressive stuff. But more than anything else, I think what this came down to was the Houston support line clutching up and getting this win. They are the ones who clinched this and played some lights-out Overwatch on the final round, outplaying Chorong and RuPaul when it really mattered, showing us why they are easily one of the best support lines in the world. Violet and Shu are absolutely insane. This was a battle, man. It really was. Crazy all series long, and definitely a rivalry in the making that I'm hoping we probably, or at least maybe, get to see in Korea, or maybe in the playoffs later this season. Regardless of when it happens, I do hope we get another rematch, because these teams feel pretty even on the surface. You maybe favor the Outlaws a little bit, but the Mayhem are not far behind, which is great, showing us that maybe the number 2 spot really isn't as locked up as we thought. If you thought the Outlaws were safe, I'd say you are sadly mistaken with this type of matchup. Mayhem are showing this is not a 2-team race by any stretch. They are definitely for real. The Pro-Am was not some sort of fluke, and I think that despite the loss they showed us, they are not going anywhere, and they're probably making Korea. I'd be pretty surprised if they choke away this opportunity. They'll most likely be there. This was an instant classic and probably one of my favorite games in the regular season, not just this year, but in recent memory. So good stuff. Definitely give that one a watch if you haven't already. But now we got to shift gears over to another major headline of many, that being the NYXL. After all of my doubts about them, they shut me up with an impressive 3-0 over the Washington Justice. I mentioned earlier how I think part of it maybe is Justice, perhaps we're looking more towards Glads, but they still did get their butts kicked. Nobody can deny that much. NYXL were in control for most, if not all, of this series, and I'm very impressed. Like, it was not perfect Overwatch by any stretch of the imagination, really. Kellen made mistakes, everyone was making mistakes at times, but they clutched up when they needed to. They seemed like they prepared well for this, and they caught the Justice with their pants down, quite frankly. They came ready to play. They wanted this one so badly after getting reverse swept a couple of weeks ago by the San Francisco Shock. They wanted to do everything they could to wipe that taste out of their mouths for good, and this one meant a lot to them. And they showed it. They showed confidence, which is something I appreciate from a bottom-level team like this, a mid-level team, if you will. That's what you have to do. You can't give your opponent room to breathe. You can't give them respect. You got to play with confidence and go out there, win or loss. That's the only way you're going to make upsets happen. They played super aggro, and the results most certainly paid off as they made the tanks and Alpha Yi's lives an absolute nightmare. Truly, it felt like the only person who came to play in this series for Washington was Flora. He was dragging this team kicking and screaming all series just for it to not be enough. He did literally everything he could while Alpha Yi was playing some of the most lackadaisical Overwatch we've seen in quite some time from him. He was killing everything on the Hanzo, extending Shambali when it probably shouldn't have been extended, just for it to still not be enough. And I can't help but feel bad for him, just because, you know, this is his former team. It probably meant a lot to him to try and win this one, but it just wasn't enough, sadly. It was the NYXL's day. It's their win to celebrate. And it's large and thanks to an uncharacteristically quiet day from most of the Justice outside of him. New York were totally in sync for the most part, and I think perhaps this one meant a little more to their guys than even Flora, as apparently both Shockwave and Psycho tried out for Washington, but did not make the team. I believe it was maybe Shockwave who made a post. I'm trying to remember. Hold on. It was either, I think it was Shockwave or Psycho, one of the two, but they're like, hey, you know, looks like we ended up making the right choice. Kind of glad we didn't make the team, right? Here it is. It says, GG's Washington Justice. Looks like us not making it from those Washington trials wasn't so bad, eh, Psycho? Like, that's some savage stuff to say. So obviously that one meant a lot to those two, and you can see it in their performance for sure. They both had excellent days, along with Fitz, along with everybody else. They were ready for this one. They're pissed they didn't make Washington, so they kicked their butts. So good on them for that. Really, really big W for New York Excelsior. And with that win, they move up to 9th place in the Western Conference with only a -3 map differential. They're tied with Defiant. Tied at 3-5 with a -3, 14-17 map record. That's some impressive stuff for a team that really didn't have all that high of expectations. This was the kind of week I was waiting for New York to have. This is the one that gets you respect and a higher ranking in most people's rankings. You beat the Justice and at least made Vancouver earn it as well. That's something we didn't really discuss, but they also took a map off Vancouver, had a crazy matchup with them on Hollywood. This was a pretty good series too. They did what they had to against teams around their skill level. They showed us that they're not going to be an easy win. They're improving by the week. Maybe the Changoon crack pipe is actually doing something after all. And I'm proud of them. I'm proud of them for finally giving me a reason to respect them. This is what I was waiting for. It's great. And when you combine their performances on the week, I can say that they're probably firmly in that mid-tier, in that discussion with teams like even Shock and Defiant and whatnot. It's good stuff, man. It's good stuff. Expectations obviously aren't all that high for this team still, even if they are in the knockouts, which is impressive for them. But maybe they can at least win like a game or two. You never know, right? Like I was saying before, any given week, any given week, it could be your team's time to shine, it feels like, if you're not in that top or bottom tier. At the end of the day, though, no matter what happens, I'd say that progress is progress, and for New York fans, that's probably going to be more than enough, just considering how the last couple of years have gone for them. But then on the other hand, you think that maybe the Justice are down, things aren't going well for them, and then they go out there and show us, no, we're fine, because they beat the Los Angeles Gladiators in a 3-0 victory to very quickly shake off the NYXL L and managed to actually get one of the top seeds in the knockouts, one of the top 4, which means they get to avoid having to play right from the bottom at the start. They'll be in the double elimination, so that's great. They'll have 2 shots to potentially make it out and make an upset happen and go to Korea. They got 5th, 5-3, looking real good. And in this Gladiator series, I mean, man, they played good. They were shutting the Gladiators out on a lot of these maps. I mean, look at Hollywood, look at Antarctic Peninsula. Even Shambali was clearly in their control. Like, it just makes no goddamn sense whatsoever. But again, it just goes back to the same exact narrative where we're in this endless cycle. Any given week. That is the theme this week. Preparation means absolutely everything right now. And from this kind of matchup, considering Gladiators are just the better team compared to New York on paper, clearly this is where they were putting most of their eggs. They went to the Gladiators basket rather than New York. They got caught off guard in that one, but came out strong for the Gladiators. They had the right game plan for them. This was their main focus. They wanted to prove they can compete with some of those higher level teams. This is the kind of win that gets you very excited about the Justice, and it's one of those kinds of wins that kind of shows why a lot of people were considering them a dark horse. I underrated them. They're proving me wrong, and I'm glad to see it. They have a lot of likable guys on that team. They're very easy to cheer for, I should say. They have a good sense of preparation, good coaching. A lot of their players are skillful. A lot of them are on comeback arcs like Flora, Ben Best, FD God. It's just a really fun team. And just the fact that they were able to beat around the Gladiators like they did makes you curious on what their potential is. Like, it really feels like Korea is a distinct possibility for them by playing so good against one of these teams that has shown they can fight with the Mayhem of all teams, you know? Like, this Glads team just a few weeks ago beat Florida, so it's no joke to take them down. It's never a joke when you're taking down the likes of Kevster and Dante and all those guys. They are legitimate. So very, very big stuff for the Justice here, as this game was all them, truly. Anytime the Gladiators made any sort of push, the Justice were just all over it. They made the adjustments every single time without fail, seemingly. They had their number throughout this whole series. Like, there are so many times where I felt like Gladiators were finally starting to turn things their way. Like on Hollywood, they're winning a fight to try and unlock the car, and then boom! Justice somehow clutch out fight after fight after fight, full hold them. On Shambali, right? Gladiators are gaining some momentum. They get to point B, and then boom, like halfway through it, their progress is just stopped. That's it. Justice set up some sort of wall, and they're done for. It's unfortunate to lose to NYXL, but just the fact that they beat Gladiators makes me not all that worried. It makes things a lot more confusing, sure, but the Justice themselves, I feel, are in a pretty good place right now, truly. Aside from that, I think that's about all I have to say in regards to Washington Justice. On the other side of it, what this means for the Gladiators, a lot of people might be wondering, should we be concerned about them? You know, they could beat Florida, they can compete with some of these top teams, but then they lose to the Justice, who they should be better than. Is this an issue? Are they on the downward trend? Well, in my opinion, no. I'm going to say a resounding no. I think Gladiators are fine. If you missed my prediction video, I said that the Gladiators were overdue for a tough loss that you wouldn't expect. It happened in this one. They got blown out a bit more than I thought they would, but it was bound to happen eventually. They're like one of the only teams to not go through such a thing. It was their time. You know, they're a good team, but they're not a great team. They're not invincible. Games like this are gonna happen for them. I knew that for a fact coming into the season, and it happened. I mean, they got punched in the mouth by a team that was obviously a lot more ready for this one. And considering the Glads also dropped a map to London, I think it's probably just not their week overall. Maybe they just weren't prepared enough. They'll probably come back strong for the knockouts. It's hard to imagine that they'll lay down and just continue to take it. I'm not worried about them. So long as they have Kevster and that DPS line, I think it's always winnable. So we'll see what happens for the purple and white as we head into next week. They're one of the higher seeds in the knockouts as well, so they'll get 2 opportunities to potentially punch their tickets to Korea. Speaking of potentially punching their tickets to Korea, I wanted to move on over to the Vancouver Titans. They didn't have like a godlike week. I mean, it wasn't anything you're going to be writing home about, but I think they did enough to still impress you and to stand out and to show you that they are probably one of the more respectable teams in the Overwatch League right now. I mean, it starts with taking care of business against NYXL, I'd say. They looked pretty darn good in this series. New York made them earn it. You know, New York are probably considered to be more around their skill level now in the current day, but they beat them up pretty good, especially in the second half of this series. I mean, Hollywood, they beat them friggin' 6-4. They completed Hollywood twice. That is some absolutely insane stuff. They 1-0 them on Shambali. They take care of business on push. Like, they got stronger as this series went on, seemingly, and that's really great to see against competition that is around their skill level. But honestly, what I'm more so excited about, like, because I kind of expect them to beat New York, is the Houston game, right? They took a map off Houston, and a lot of people would argue that this came dangerously close to going to a map 5 in like a potential reverse sweep territory. I mean, this damn near went the distance. They showed fight on, I'd say, 3 out of 4 maps. This really could have went their way with some slightly better execution. Houston had to really take them seriously and buckle down to get this series from getting too out of hand. Like, I'd say the Titans more so just ran out of gas. They couldn't execute at the end. The Outlaws playmakers were a bit too much for them. But the fact that nobody expected them to win the series to begin with, but they put up this kind of fight, is very exciting and makes them, again, just like with a lot of these other teams, a big-time dark horse that could maybe make it out of Korea if they come ready. Like, this team has beaten and has competed with a lot of solid teams. They're showing consistency this season. They're showing growth. The DPS line and Punk are working in harmony. Aspire looks a lot more confident now that he's in his Tracer role. Crimzo and Faith have been rocks this entire season, and they look better by the week, seemingly always making clutch plays when this team needs them to. And while the Titans don't have top-tier superstars per se, they just have a really smart cast who's going to outwork you, and that can go a long way. We saw it happen with London last year, for an example. Just a good all-around cast over in Vancouver. They're one of those teams that I think you probably need to be on the lookout for. The fact that they're in the knockouts makes them pretty scary. They're not expected to make it out, and that makes them dangerous. They could sneak up on some of these better teams. It could happen. I mean, they secured a spot. They went 4-4. And from a record standpoint, top 7, +2 map differential, looking pretty darn good. Only 1 win behind both Gladiators and Justice, who have also been pretty solid. And I'd say the great thing about Vancouver is they've really only had like 1 poor performance this entire stage, if you will, this entire qualifier. Like, aside from getting blown out by Atlanta, which you can't blame them for, they've looked good in their matches. You know, they've either won them pretty convincingly against the teams you think they should beat, or they're looking competitive and giving us good showings against solid, above-average teams. In that first week against Florida, people often forget, that almost went into reverse sweep territory. It just happened with Houston. They made the Gladiators earn their victory the other week. They are a scary underdog. I'd argue they probably have the best shot of making a surprise run with how they are playing right now. When you only have like 1 really bad performance, you're arguably like in that top 10 overall in the league. Like, one of the better teams in the Western Conference. Like, even if you're not winning these games, the fact that you're showing up for them says a lot more than a bunch of these other teams. Like, truly, they've beaten or played close against most of the teams in the bracket. I mean this genuinely. I don't think the Titans have been this exciting since like 2019 in the runaway days. And I'd say that means nature is finally healing. And I couldn't be more happy for any of my Titans fans watching. This is a long time coming. And for me personally, they're probably quickly, I might add, one of my favorite teams to watch in the league this season. And I'm very hyped to watch them play in the knockouts this weekend. On the topic of knockouts, for I'd say one last time here in this video, I wanted to bring up the Boston Uprising, another team that is starting to slowly but surely rise their stock and regain that respect once lost. The Uprising finally look like the team we were promised. It feels like they're hitting their stride at the perfect time, and they're playing at the potential that we know their players are capable of. I think the execution has been looking cleaner by the week since their initial struggles against Titans, and it helps that Izayaki is also back, so they're officially, at least on paper, at full strength. And there could be a bunch of different reasons why this is happening. I'd like to lean towards the fact that they got rid of their assistant coach Jidset. I think that dumping him probably created a mindset change that made the players a lot happier and maybe even more focused. I'm seeing more smiles out of their guys. It just looks like they're having more fun out there. So I'd assume that at least part of their issues had to do with that coach. I mean, really, the team's been on fire. Smurf is always good, that's to be expected. Twilight has been on fire as of late. The DPS are starting to look good. Birdring specifically is really starting to come to life, slowly but surely taking over these games more and more often. He's standing out more as an individual on this team, and the timing couldn't be more perfect. We know what Birdring is capable of in tournament settings, so the fact that he's returning to form is only going to increase Boston's favor of making it into Korea in a couple of weeks. His Sombra just looks a lot cleaner than what we saw maybe in the first couple of weeks, and Boston's coordination with him also looks very good. And I think that if he keeps this up, along with Decay and Smurf, they'll be one of the best teams in the West for sure. Right now, they feel like one of the best teams, but there'll be no doubt about it if they continue to play that way. And I think just taking a map off Atlanta Reign is part of the reason I wanted to talk to them. I know it's only one and the rest of the series didn't really go their way, but I think it's a big deal to even just take one off of them, as it's only the second time, mind you, that Atlanta Reign have lost a map this entire qualifier, this entire season so far. It is the second time, with the only other one coming against the Outlaws. And it was on Control. Control can always be crazy, but it's just good to see Boston get that kind of win. It gives you more confidence in their abilities to keep up with and even beat top teams in the league. And Coach Gator himself even tipped his hat to them, saying that they're probably going to make Korea if they play this way. So if the top guys are respecting them, then they're probably worth taking seriously, I'd say. I mean, they fought hard through the booming allegations. They've climbed a long way up the mountain to get here, and they feel like they're ready to be a top team right now. If they play like how we saw in Week 5, the way they played against Atlanta, and how they were able to quite easily beat the San Francisco Shock, then they're going to be in Korea for sure. Speaking of the San Francisco Shock, I know they've been a talk of the town as of late, but not much has changed, so I'm actually going to mostly skip the Shock talk this week. I think they're still suffering from a lot of the same issues we touched base on last week. If you missed that podcast episode, definitely check out the playlist down below. But really, they just can't beat anyone of note. They look very disorganized, not confident, and the stage is essentially over for them, really. It might take a really in-depth what is wrong with your team video to really get to the bottom of it. I don't know if a podcast episode could really do it some justice. Let me know if you want that to be your first what is wrong with your team video here in the new season. It's probably going to happen eventually, maybe as soon as next week, especially if they end up losing in the knockouts. For now though, we'll just chalk up the stage as an L and move on. We'll assume there's no hope for them with how they're playing. I mean, really, they just barely qualified. They barely qualified over London Spitfire at 3-5, so enough said there. That's pretty much it, though, in terms of the headlines with the games and the matches. There was a lot of stuff that happened this week, man. It was pretty crazy. At least in terms of the West, I think that most of the matches this week were pretty entertaining, and we had a lot of surprising results, along with some interesting ones that get you excited for the upcoming weekend. To just touch base on one more thing with the West, I guess, before we move on, because we talked about the games, it's that both the 1 and 2 seeds for the automatic qualifiers in the West to Korea have been decided. To the surprise of no one, they are the Atlanta Reign and the Houston Outlaws. Atlanta Reign managing to go 8-0 in their qualifiers with just 2 map losses to their names, both of which being on Control, and the rest of the way they've looked really good. And right behind them is the Houston Outlaws, sitting at 7-1 with under 10 map losses on the year so far. They have also looked excellent for the most part, only really being pushed by Florida Mayhem outside of the rain game. They're sitting pretty. They look like one of the best teams in the league. Definitely the second best in the league for me personally right now, only behind Atlanta. They look good. Pelicans nice, Happy's clutch. They're just playing in total unison right now, and I would not be surprised if they also somehow come away with that midseason madness title. Both of these teams will qualify automatically, and they avoid the knockouts altogether. Congrats to them. We'll discuss briefly a bit more about the cutoff in a little bit, but now I wanted to shift gears over to the East. We've given the West a lot of attention. We got to give the East some more attention and some love because they too had a pretty fun week that is worth discussing. So the big headline, I think, for a lot of people is that O2 and Dreamers absolutely boomed Dynasty and Dragons and eliminated them from the knockouts. Two OWL teams failed to make the lower bracket finals, which is really sad. And Dynasty and Dragons in particular were very disappointing. They looked pretty uninspirational in most, if not all, of their games, and they had a combined, 1-4 record in this tournament, with Dynasty's lone win coming against Rhodes, which is like the worst team in that knockout potentially. So yeah, not the best look. Too many losses to Contenders teams, lots of close calls, in general. And I think the Dynasty have really been disappointing. I know the expectations maybe weren't as high as other seasons, but I expected more from a team that definitely still does have some talent. Because right now it feels like Prophet's the only guy doing much of anything, especially in that loss to Dreamers. It was good to see Prophet come back. I'm happy he's not taking as long of a break as we thought. It was good to see him and Sunjun get some time together on stage. But he was the only guy doing anything in that Dreamers series. He still got it on the Hanzo, which is sick, but that man just can't do it alone. And I'm sad to say that I overrated this team big time coming into the season. I thought they were top 10 worthy, and they're just not. And there's really no one in sight for their suffering if they can't be Contenders teams and they look this uncompetitive. I mean, it's maybe expected from Shanghai Dragons. It was a little sad to see them lose to Sinpriza, but mostly they lost to who they probably should have. But Dynasty, they probably should have done more. I'm really sad about the results. And considering the circumstances, they're pretty lucky that they ended up getting one win on their resume. As beating that Infernal team, I still can't wrap my head around it. I don't know how they beat Infernal in week 1. They're lucky to have gotten that win. And if it weren't for that, they'd be the worst team in the East right now for sure. We're going to be calling them a bottom 3 or 4 team in the league with how they're playing. Like, it's pretty sad. It's really sad to see how far from grace they've fallen. It sucks with the APAC situation, how hard it screwed them over, but they failed to adjust. This meta's not good for them, and they need to regroup and fast, I'd argue, or their season is in grave danger. But on the topic of the team that beat them, I definitely want to highlight Dreamers. I know they're a Contenders team. It's not as interesting in the grand scheme of things, but they had a pretty awesome week. This was a nice comeback, bounce back performance for them. Like, they played so amazing this week compared to a very pathetic week 1 knockouts performance where they got bounced out from upper bracket in the first round. Like, from uninspirational and not clutch to a bunch of chads that are now competing in losers finals. Like, it's one thing to bounce back against Poker Face, right? Like, it's a Contenders team. You never know what's going to happen there. But to also shock the Dynasty in 3-0 fashion like they did is some crazy stuff. And it's showing that, yeah, I was wrong to give up on them as soon as I did. I'm a little disappointed they couldn't have, played better the previous week when I was believing in them. But I'm glad to see those guys doing well. And even if they aren't necessarily the most versatile team, they're making it work in kind of like that London Spitfire fashion, which is really cool to see. Like, I'm very proud of them. They have some of the best short-term memory I've ever seen. Dreamer's going crazy on the Rhine, and Spectra, he's been damn impressive. He is showing us why he deserves a shot at OWL. I think it might have been the Dynasty game, correct me if I'm wrong, but he had like a very large percentage of his team's final blows. He's playing out of his freaking mind like the whole entire weekend. This guy is for real, and I'm hoping this maybe helps rise his stock for the future. Maybe not this year just because of financial reasons and everything, but maybe next year I'll end up making the league if he continues to play this way. And Dreamers are in a good spot to become one of the fan favorites and to maybe make it back for the next knockouts in the playoffs later this season. Excuse my dog again, by the way, if you hear her. I just really like the way Dreamers are playing. They're really fun to watch. They're very easy to cheer for, especially for me as a former Valiant fan who watched Dreamer in his rookie season. Love watching that guy succeed. Their style of play just makes them stand out very much, and the players themselves are super likable. It's been a great journey to watch. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to end against Guangzhou Charge this weekend, But you never know, right? That's the beauty of the competitive nature of the league this year, especially in the East. These Contenders teams sneak up on you. The Charge nearly did go to a map 5 against Poker Face, so who's to say that Dreamers are completely out of this thing? They're definitely the underdogs, but you can't count them out completely. Regardless of what happens, it should be a lot of fun to watch them play at least one more time. I'm praying for the best, but I'm not expecting them to beat Guangzhou. Speaking of the Guangzhou Charge, though, what about their reverse sweep loss to the Hangzhou Spark? The Zhou rivalry, so to speak, continues to live up to expectations. This was a gigabanger of a series, reminiscent of the knockouts from last year where Guangzhou would end up getting eliminated. They played the Chengdu Hunters in that one, I believe, but it's like the same thing, like reverse sweep in a devastating tournament scenario. It was a tough one for the Charge. Like, this was a really good game, quite possibly the best game of the season in the East. Like, Infernal and Charge played a great one as well, but this one kind of felt similar to Florida Mayhem and the Houston Outlaws game, where it's just blow for blow. Like, I know it was a reverse sweep with the score, but it didn't feel that way. I think we can all agree with that. It did not feel one-sided at all from like one half of the series to the next. It was just two awesome teams going at it through an entire series, just trying to make the others will bend, so to speak. I think that Shy and Choi going back and forth, trying to make the bigger plays when it mattered was sick. You have Choi going crazy on the Tracer, Shy going crazy on the hit scan and the Hanzo. This was really fun. Like, this is exactly why the top of the East is so awesome this year. It's just so evenly matched between them as well as Soul Infernal. And, I mean, there's a good chance we're going to see them play again this week in a rematch, which is wonderful. I'd love to see the Charge maybe get some revenge, or at least give us another 5-map banger. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen week to week with these guys. The Zhou rivalry is stronger than it's ever been before. Like, it's unfortunate to see Charge lose another close one to prove themselves. They lost to Infernal as well. It definitely hurts their stock a little bit, but at least, they're making it close and they're showing us why they deserve to be considered a top team in the East and quite possibly the league. On the other side of things, the winner's perspective, the Spark, man, they finally woke up. It took them quite a bit of time after disappointments against Infernal and Charge, but they did it. They got a well-needed win to get their mojo back and avoid another gut-wrenching loss that quite possibly could have broken their confidence considering the expectations on their shoulders. And I think the one big thing to note with the series that we're probably going to take away from it is maybe they found something with Shy playing less Sombra. It's never been within his realm of comfort. He's never been that great with the hero. So I think straying away from her as much as they can is going to help them be a more dynamic team. We saw it in this Guangzhou series. It was hella close, but I think his Hanzo and his hit scan pairs very well with the dive of Leave and Guxue. It adds another element, another layer to this team that makes them way more dangerous and way more comfortable. When Shy is truly in his element and he's hitting those kills and he's able to actively find those big picks in those scenarios that we know he's capable of, it just opens so much up for the Hangzhou Spark, When they can get away with not playing the Sombra, I think they need to do it moving forward. They have to find their own way to win. We're seeing Dallas Fuel do that, and I think they need to try and adopt that mindset as well. I think, at least for me personally, that's going to be their ticket to making Korea. And being that team that we know they can be as one of the top teams in the league, at least potential-wise, that's what they've got to do. Like, with the shots he was hitting in this series, it's so painfully clear that this team feels so much better when they're not on Sombra. They're not a Sombra team. It's really sad because RUI-led teams, well, coach teams, I should say, always love the Sombra, but you need to leave on Tracer, so that just leaves Shy in the Sombra situation. It's similar to Proper, right? Where you just want him to do more. Not everybody can be Lip. You want them on their comfort picks so they can be some of the best players in the world. We saw that from Shy in this series. He was a game changer. And that's why the Spark were able to come away with this one. It took a big time effort, but I think as the series went on, him and the Spark got stronger and stronger and stronger, and you love to see it. We didn't want to see the Spark be massively overrated, so this is a massive win and gets them one step closer to making Korea. There is one win left to go. They'll play either Guangzhou Charge or Dreamers this weekend. Aside from that, though, I think that's kind of like the main storylines of the East to cover, right? Like, Poker Face was a disappointment. Rhodes played how you'd expect. Panthera, we talked about a little before, had a nice little bit of a comeback week by surprise throwing Sin Priz on even taking a map off O2 Blast, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I don't think Infernal in Dallas was anything crazy. MN3 was absolutely a nutcase in that series, but not much else to describe aside from that. So yeah, I think that's basically all the major information in my thought process in the East. So now I'm going to try and do a bit of what should I call it? A new segment here on the podcast. I do a lot of highlighting and thought processes with teams and players and stuff, but maybe we could use a little bit of a refresher, something else to make the podcast a bit more unique. Maybe we'll add in more of these as time goes on, but for now, I think I'm going to start with some players of the week. I think that's a pretty fun thing to go over just because, there's always those fan favorites that play really well in some series and make a huge difference. I think for now, and we can adjust it maybe in the future, but I think for now we're going to go with like one player per position, one standout player per position this week, like my MVPs, if you will, of each position. I think at support, to kick it off, probably going to be Shu. I do have some clips somewhere, yeah, just to have a little bit of a background gameplay going on here. I thought Shu played excellent in this series against Florida. He was the major difference maker, as good as everyone else was. He made huge plays from the start of this series until the very end. That map 5 in particular, he went nuts. He was hitting so many major cooldowns, keeping his team up with the nanos. I was very impressed. It's a very typical Shu masterclass. It's nothing new, but he's once again showing us why he is probably the best flex support in the league right now. Like, he's probably more impactful than somebody like Fielder, with just the kind of impact and game-changing plays he's making on this Houston team. He feels right at home. This is his third Owl team he's been on, and nothing has changed. He's still a god when he needs to be. He hits all the big shots. Gotta love how Shu played in this one. Moving onward, I think my DPS MVP for the week, I thought about this carefully, but I'm going to go with Flora, actually. I think there's a lot of options, like you could go with Shy, MN3, amongst others, but I want to go with Flora for the simple fact that I think he played well in both matches this weekend. One was obviously in a losing effort, but I think he was just hitting a lot of shots. He was on fire. It was his week to dominate, and it gives you a lot of confidence as a Justice fan heading into the knockouts next week. If he's playing like this, if he's playing out of his mind, if he's trying to make up for those NYXL days, you're in trouble, man. Like, his Hanzo is legit. He might be the best Hanzo in the league with some of these amazing picks that he gets time after time. He was consistently brilliant, win or loss. Like, he didn't take anything personally with the NYXL series, didn't let it get to him. He moved forward and continued to be the carry. And something I actually wanted to bring up that I thought was really funny was his coach, Get Amazed, in that Gladiators series, said something along the lines of, turn on your aimbot today. Like, he was joking about it, of course, trying to, lighten up the player before the match. But then he goes out and actually does it. And I can't agree more with how he played in this series. He had a ton of ridiculous shots. My guy had a beastly series, and I'm excited to see where he goes from here, if he can build up some more masterclasses on that Hanzo. And lastly, on tank, maybe it's going to seem a little weird because it's another Houston player, but I'm going with Fearless, actually. I really liked the way that Fearless played this entire weekend. I just showed you the clip before. You saw it with this carry play. I can rewind it. Like, Fearless went bananas with the Primal here. Like, it's just, he did so many great plays like this throughout this entire Florida series that maybe go unnoticed just because of how close it was, your attention being split. But Fearless was a real difference maker in this game, in the Vancouver game. Loved the way he played from start to finish. I mean, my guy was super clutch. This is like the vintage Fearless Winston experience. Like, I just think back to the Nepal match, New Queen Street against Florida. He showed up against one of the league's best tank players as well. Someone is like a star on the rise, arguably the most flexible tank aside from Smurf, like on that level. He's like playing at a superstar level this year, but Fearless matched him blow for blow, showed that he is the Winston master, and he set the tone with bigger carry plays when the game was on the line. He outplayed one of his best possible competition at tank, like, truly. He did more throughout most of the series, as good as someone was. Fearless showed why he was the Grand Finals MVP. He's looking like he's starting to fit in more at this Houston team, get more on the same page with them, so great stuff from him. Fearless played great. It may seem a little silly to have two Houston players, but I can't help myself because of how much of an inspiration they were. And those are actually going to be my players of the week. No love to the East, sadly. Maybe I can change that in the future to like a West and East MVP for each role. Let me know what you think about that down in the comments below. For now, I'll just do 3. But yeah, those are my players of the week. So now, before we wrap up the podcast for today, we can look towards the future as we usually do. Obviously, I'm not the best with predicting, but it's more of just a preview. So we have our tournaments starting in both regions now. Like the knockouts is well underway in the East. They have just one more weekend of matches to go, 4 matches total. You know, you have your losers finals in A and B side, Dreamers versus Guangzhou in A, and then O2 Blast versus Dallas in B. Both of those games could be rather entertaining. Again, Dreamers just beat Poker Face, who looked good against Guangzhou. I know it's not the best logic, but by that means, you know, maybe they could have put up a good fight against Charge. Spark will be awaiting the winner of that one. Inferno will be awaiting the winner of O2 Blast versus Dallas, which I'm definitely more interested in. O2 Blast have been, like, far and none the best Contenders team. I don't think anyone can doubt that. And they very well might just be the second best team in this B-side bracket. Like, as good as Dallas Fuel are, O2 Blast are no joke. I'm not going to spoil anything. That'll come later in the week with predictions, but this feels like it could go either way. Dallas are the veterans. Some people might favor them, but a lot of people might favor O2 Blast because they're more versatile. They've just looked good this entire knockout, really, like from start to finish. I mean, they almost beat Soul Infernal. They've come closer to beating Soul Infernal than Dallas have, so if you go by that logic, then O2 just might be upsetting yet another Overwatch League team, eliminating their second Overwatch League team in 2 weeks, which would be bananas. And they might have an opportunity to actually make it through the knockouts. Inferno, we're not ready for them. I believe it's the first to 4. It's a best of 7 series, if you will, for finals. So could go either way. There's a lot of room for Inferno to improve, but in a long series like that, O2 Blast might be able to wear them down. Should be a really good weekend in the East. Like, the last remaining teams, the last 6 remaining teams, whatever it is, they're all pretty fun, and they all have their own interesting storylines. A lot of people will be on the lookout to see if a Contenders team can actually make it to Korea. That would be insane. Maybe a little embarrassing for the East, but, you know, entertaining nonetheless, I'd say. As for the Western Conference, the thing that we haven't really been able to take a look at until now, we finally have the picture decided. This is what it is going to look like. It is a very interesting format. Like, it's clear that performing well in the qualifiers gave you an incentive, a bit of an advantage over the bottom half of the top 8 on the cutoff. Like, it seems that the top 4 actually get 2 opportunities to make it into the mid-season madness tournament. It's double elimination for them. They'll get a second chance of life if they end up losing their winner's bracket game. Only 2 of them will advance, keep that in mind. We have a total of 4 teams representing the West and 2 in the East. Only 2 of these guys will make it through. The cool thing is for the top side of the bracket, I guess, is that you just technically need to win 2 and you're automatically in. For the rest of you guys, it could be a lot tougher. But I don't really know how I feel about this bracket. Like, since there's 8 teams, since it's even, couldn't you just do like a normal double elimination or even single elimination bracket if you wanted to? Just with like the 8 teams, you know, have the top seed have Florida play the bottom seed. I think that's San Francisco Shock, for example. Like, that just seems like it'd be, you know, maybe a bit simpler. Maybe we could be poised for some upsets that way early on. Like, I understand you want to push for teams to do well in regular season play to make it matter more, but maybe that's just me. It feels maybe a little unfair to have 4 teams get 2 chances and then 4 teams only get 1. I mean, it is cool since, like, some of these teams are going to play with their lives, like they depend on it. Their lives are on the line here. Their Korea hopes and dreams are on the line, if you will. And that could motivate some of these teams to actually pull off the upset, like Shock. Maybe that'll wake them up. Titans, maybe that's just what they need. Just knowing that a team could be waiting for them, you know, unsuspecting top team could be waiting for them, and that's when they can strike, build up their confidence, and then go from there. But the matches themselves are looking pretty good. You know, as much as the bracket feels weird to me, like the positives and the negatives, at least the bracket itself has some good matches. Like, we have a Pro-Am / like week 3 rematch, I forget when it was, Gladiators in Florida, renewing their rivalry once again. Glads might come out swinging, ready for this one, like they did the last time. Justice versus Boston, I think Reinforce mentioned it. Decay versus his former team. That could be very intriguing. The last time these two played, Boston absolutely rolled them. A lot has changed since then. I think both teams have gotten a lot better. So that could be a good one. Both teams are looking more confident than they have all season. They're riding off some big-time highs. And losers, I mean, Shock Titans. Shock actually might be underdogs. Like, it's crazy to think about that. We haven't really seen them as underdogs in like this early of a round, and I don't even know how long, maybe ever in their time of making tournaments. But that's besides from the point. Like, they really could lose to the Titans. I think Titans actually are the favored team. I'm not going to say who I think wins just yet. I don't know, spoilers there, but it's going to be an uphill battle for the Shock with how they're playing. The Titans are going to be scary for them to deal with. The Titans are very much on the same page, and that could lead to disaster for the Shock. They could get eliminated in the first round. This team, for a lot of people that you kind of expected to be a title contender, could be losing as the 10th seed, the lowest seed in the knockouts in the very first round. Absolutely crazy stuff. And then with New York and Defiant, I mean, the last time these two played, it went to a map 5. New York have gotten a lot better since that match. Toronto have arguably gotten worse since that match. These are some really big matches. I think that the seeding worked out well in that way. I think there'll probably be at least like one upset in this first round, in like losers round 1 or winners round 2. Something big's gonna happen. I just know it. I'll be streaming these games, by the way, so if you want to tune into the co-streams, definitely look out. I'll be live 2:30 p.m. EST every single day of the Western knockouts, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, these games look good. I'm excited for what's to come. I think that knockouts on both sides of the world, if you will, are looking great. We're going to have some good matches this weekend, hopefully. Some potential rematches. Only a couple of spots are on the line here. 2 from the East, 2 from the West. 4 teams will be punching their tickets to Korea alongside Houston and Atlanta. I don't know what's going to happen. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more podcasts every single week. Give me some feedback on what you think about the new little section of the podcast that we added with Players of the Week and other improvements I can make. This has been ATP. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.